Hey, Nerf Herder, I'm Addy Thomas.
And I'm Case Aiken.
I know, surprise, it's not Ben this time, because Ben's sick and a wimp. And
yes.
he couldn't make it, which is terrible, because we got a really special episode today. We're going to get to that in just a second. But I want to remind you, if you happen to be looking for good insurance and you're not sure if, if you don't have a guide, if you don't have your Gandalf to guide you through the paths of insurance, to guide you through that winding trails in Mirkwood that is the insurance industry, fortunately we have Maria Monzon who can help you out. She's a personal friend. She is someone who's actually helped me out with 3 different insurance policies. You can find all of her information, all of the states that she's certified in, all the different types of insurance that she can offer through Liberty Mutual. All of that is available on our website, certainpov.com. Also, while you're out there, don't forget to check out all of our podcasts that are part of Certain Point of View. Not only do we have this podcast, but we have Case. We have you with Another Pass. We've got you leading our merry band of Star Wars adventures in the Scruffy Nerf Herders Star Wars D20 story. Then we've also got some more buddies of ours. We've got Matt and Jeff with Fun and Games with Matt and Jeff as they explore video games from a variety of very thoughtful positions. And newly added, Matt Storm has actually added another podcast. He has many podcasts, actually.
Yeah, we are like a fraction of his podcast world. But
exactly. Well, right now we're actually half of his podcast world. So
at the moment, yes.
Yes, at the moment. But I'm sure next week that'll probably change. But Matt Storm has a new podcast, Reignite, as he and Mary, I don't remember.
MJ Bradley.
MJ Bradley. Okay. MJ Bradley, he and his friend MJ Bradley, they are exploring sort of their journey through Mass Effect right now. They're playing through and they're just kind of having fun with the morality system there. We have a variety of podcasts, and I can tell you there are more podcasts on the way with Certain Point of View. Hopefully, maybe by the end of the year, maybe early next year. But we got a lot of fun stuff on the way that we aren't going to talk about just yet. But fortunately, today we have a very special guest. So let's get to that. But before we go there, don't forget, certainpov.com is where all of our podcasts can be found. So while we don't have Ben with us today, Case is filling in, and this is what's really cool is this is a person that Case and I kind of talked about like 6 months ago. We were just sitting down and talking about people we happen to follow on Twitter, and this happens to be one of a couple people that I like having push notifications from, just because they're one of my favorite geeks on the internet. And that includes Ryan Johnson, actually, and of course other people that we podcast with. So it's really cool to kind of thought, like 6 months ago, we were like, all right, this is someone who's on our list that we'd love to talk to geek out with. And we have someone who is right now currently a freelance editor, and as someone who's been an editor at Marvel Comics as well for some of my favorite comics, especially since this is a Star Wars show, some of the best additions, not just to comics in general, but also to the Star Wars universe. So we're really excited to have Heather Antos with us. Thanks for joining us, Heather.
Ah, what an intro. Wait. So let's reel back. You have push notifications for me on Twitter?
Yes, that sounds weird now, but like there are a couple people that, well, I mean, obviously, I don't want to get too in depth with this part.
I am curious about this because, like, I'm just a Twitter junkie, so like I'm just on Twitter whenever I'm bored.
Right.
So like I don't need push notifications.
No, well, see, I have to, because I also have tons of Discord notifications for all sorts, because I'm a Pokemon Go addict right now, and I'm a WoW addict, and all the different stuff, all the different things I'm doing. So if I'm gonna read something, it's got to be push notifications. And I think I don't remember what it was, because it was after Comicsgate kind of really got, the big moments in Comicsgate. But I started following you. I think I want to say it was around. It had to do when I discovered Gwenpool for myself, and that's when I started following you. Ryan Johnson. I think Pablo Hidalgo is another one that I like following. Of course, Case, because I do kind of want to know what Case posts out there, so when it happens, so I know when I can retweet. So, but yeah, you're one of my favorite nerds on the internet.
Oh my gosh, that's like so flattering, and also kind of weird.
Yeah, I know. We should move on from that.
Let's move on from that.
Well, I'm taking positive things away from it. So
thank you.
Please do. So Heather, again, thank you for coming on. Like I was fairly surprised when I reached out to you to see if you wanted to come on the podcast when you said yes. So that because when we had that 6 month ago conversation, it was like, oh yeah, in years if we keep building our brand. And then I just like you had a tweet about like thanking people whose podcasts you had been on, and I was like, I'm going to take a shot.
Yeah.
So very much appreciate that. We've got a bunch of questions for you if you're happy to do some Q&A with us.
Awesome. Let's do it.
Okay, so my first one, and this is actually sort of more of one of those questions where it's just like, I've heard the answer, but I would love to hear you tell it again and potentially for our listeners. So I was really impressed with the whole process of putting together Unlawful Good and then everything that went from there into building your career. Since I know that it started off as a side project, that you were just interested in comics, and then like, would you care to share that story and sort of like what sort of takeaways that you have from your different shifts between, first totally freelance to being an assistant editor to an editor, and then making the career shift over to video games and eSports?
Oh my gosh, that's a heavy question. There's a lot
Cliff
in
Notes
that.
version, but yeah.
Mine are much lighter, don't worry.
I could do a podcast in and of itself on this question. No, I mean, yeah, so I like all people, all nerds in like high school and college, I wanted to be a professional nerd. It's what I wanted to do. I didn't quite know what path that was necessarily. Like my whole life I grew up, I wrote, I drew, I acted, I was a film major, and throughout college I wrote for various media sites covering comics and film and TV reviews and video games reviews and stuff like that. And I was kind of going through a bit of a, I guess, senior in college, what the hell is life? As an adult, like afterwards crisis, didn't know what I wanted to do. And my friend, one of my really good friends, was just like, well, you like comics, why don't you just do that? And it was just kind of this weird moment for me, because up until then I never had actually considered like, oh yeah, people get paid for that. Because that's not, at career day at school, Grant Morrison doesn't come in and talk to the kindergartners and tell them what a great gig comics is. Jim Lee doesn't do, like that doesn't happen. And so it was just never presented to me as an option that, oh yeah, there are dozens of people that go in, dozens of hundreds and thousands of people across the world that go into making these amazing stories that have grown into video games and film and TV, et cetera, et cetera. And so I just started researching like what opportunities there were, what was out there, what I could do. And that's how I kind of discovered the role of the comic book editor. And I was really curious by that title, because I knew what a traditional editor does for, like, say, a newspaper or a novel, But there's so much more involved with comics than there is with journalism or fiction. And so I wanted to figure this out. What is this puzzle? What did they do? So I did what any good millennial does, and I reached out and tweeted to editors on Twitter. And that's how I met, actually, my future boss at Marvel was Jordan White. I was a huge fan of the Deadpool run at the time that he was editing. I saw that he was going to be at C2E2, and I just said, like, hey, I'm going to be there. Will you sit down and talk with me about comics editing? And he agreed. And so, yeah, we met up, and I just picked his brain for like half an hour about what it is a comic editor does. And I walked out of that convention, that C2E2, knowing that's it. That's what I want to do. Unfortunately, at that time, I had already graduated college, and so the options of me getting an internship with, say, like Marvel, DC, IDW, any of those publishers were slim to none, as you had to be in college in order to get the internship. So I decided I was going to do the next best thing and create my own internship. I was going to put together a project that I could then present to editors at publishers and show, like, look what I did. I made this. I edited this. I put this team together. I funded it. I made a budget. I put it to print. And it looks like a quality book. It doesn't look like something that, someone just threw together. And that's what I did. I spent that whole next summer putting together a project called Unlawful Good, as you mentioned, Case. It is an anthology of 17 8-page crime stories from over roughly 50 creators from all over the world. I think we had something like 11 different countries involved, 3 different continents. It was crazy. At the time, we were one of the best funded comic projects on Kickstarter, so much so that Kickstarter took notice of the project, and when they found out I was going to be at New York Comic Con later that year, they asked me to speak on their Kickstarter panel, which was kind of crazy because my Kickstarter campaign hadn't ended yet. It was still running. But at that same convention, I saw Jordan again, and we had kept in touch throughout the summer. He knew what I was doing, but while I was at that convention, I had a ash can, a sample of the book with me, and I was able to show him, hey, remember what we talked about 6 months ago? Look what I did since. And he saw the work, and he was just would you ever be interested in moving to New York? And I said, absolutely. And a month later, I started interviewing with Marvel, which was crazy.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, that's pretty cool, going from just taking something from the grassroots and just putting it to together yourself and being able to translate that. I mean, I think that's one of those things that's cool, but since it's not just a pipe dream, but something you actually took and translated into an actual career. Where I think a lot of us sometimes just think about, oh well, I'd like to do a podcast, or I'd like to create a comic or something. So it's really cool to see that. One thing that I guess we know that a lot of creative endeavors are collaborative, but there's sometimes certain names that definitely come to the forefront, particularly writers and illustrators when it comes to comics. Where does kind of the editor play in all of that?
It depends on the publisher. It depends on the book. It depends on the creative team. It's all circumstantial. It depends on, licensed product versus creator owned. For example, say something like Deadpool or Star Wars at Marvel, what I worked on there. Obviously, I'm the keeper of those keys as editor on those books. So it's my job to either have a rough idea of a project I want to do. Say, I don't know, I want to do a Darth Vader book. And so we know we want to do Darth Vader. We know roughly we want it to be, right after A New Hope, to fit into other continuity. Okay, who do I think would be a good idea to work on that? And let's say hypothetically we go with Kieran Gillen. I don't know.
It seems like a great idea if you ever
I think he can get it. But yeah, so then at that point, you either have one writer in mind that you think that you're pretty confident they're the one, and are working with them on their pitch, or you go to a couple different writers and you have a pitch off, basically a bake off. Have a couple of different people send in pitches, and then you pick which one you like best.
Or if you're Alan Moore, you threaten to strangle them if they don't let you write the book.
You know what? Shit happens. It's comics. It's rough out there. I don't judge. Yeah. And so from that point, obviously with Star Wars, it gets a little more complicated because you have Lucasfilm involved and all of that side of things. But let's pretend that they're not.
For the moment, because we actually do want to ask you about that.
Of course.
Yeah, exactly.
Of course. But for the moment, they're not involved. But yeah, it would be, the editor and the writer, coming together and working on a pitch and a story that they feel is really strong. and then moving forward and finding an artist with that. But in a situation like that, where you're working with Marvel or DC or another keeper of the keys, if you will, keeper of the kingdom, at the end of the day, my word is law. So hypothetically, Kieran Gillen is pitching, you know what? I want to tell this great story. Darth Vader is going to be in an all-white costume because he's a good guy now. And though I might personally think that's the most brilliant thing to ever happen since midichlorians, at the end of the day, my word is law. If I say no, that's it. You know, Kieran is welcome to debate it with me and tell me why he thinks it's a great idea. You know, Vader's really into color runs these days. Who knows? But yeah, like if I say no, that's just how it is. And we can come up with a different idea or different compromise and move forward. Now, bringing this to a different circumstance in comics, say Kieran wanted to do a creator-owned project, let's call it Wicked and Divine, and he hired me on as editor. Now, he's technically my boss, even though I'm still telling him, you know, this is your schedule, hit these deadlines, giving him story notes, et cetera, brainstorming. Very much a similar situation as to what I, you know, did with him at Marvel. At the end of the day, his word is law. If I tell him, you know, I don't think the story point makes sense, I think, you know, they should go tap dancing instead, I don't understand why this book is all an analogy for theology, it doesn't matter if I disagree. You know, if Kieran wants to do it strongly enough, he can. It's his book. He's the keeper of those keys, and that's really, I think, in the most black and white, the difference of it is who ultimately has final say.
That makes a lot of sense. So how does it work? You know, with all of that, all of those different factors, and you're obviously directing a lot of different traffic, and there's a lot of people skills obviously involved with this. How involved does Lucasfilm Story Group get in the process? I think that's another thing that's really hazy for Star Wars fans, and I can say, you know, so I think you're definitely a fan of the new additions to Star Wars. I mean, I know you're not a huge JJ fan, but Ben and I are huge fans of the new stuff, and obviously there's that big divide in Star Wars right now. It's a civil war of its own right now. But where does Lucasfilm Story Group kind of fit in that picture?
Yeah, so it varies. It varies entirely on what is going on in the Star Wars continuity and the different timelines at that time. The farther away things are from the films and TV shows, basically, the less hands-on they are. So when it came to doing Dr. Aphra, a book that really doesn't tie in with any film characters aside from when we did the crossover with the main series and the occasional appearance of Darth Vader himself.
Right.
You know, we pretty much get free reign so long as it still feels like Star Wars. But then when you go into telling a story about, you know, Luke's quest to become a Jedi, especially between A New Hope and Empire, you have this, you know, you already have your A to Z plotted for you. You know, like you know where he ends up at the beginning of Empire, so you can't surpass that.
Right.
Like, for example, him in the Wampa's Den, when he uses the Force to pull the lightsaber. Spoilers if you haven't seen Empire. He uses the Force.
Well, I was going to get to it tonight, but thanks.
I've been yelled at a Star Wars podcast before for potentially spoiling Star Wars, so I just...
Oh my god. This is a zone where we spoil everything.
Everything.
Like, I don't know why you would click on an episode that says... So we've been catching up on the Poe Dameron series right now. And like, why should we put a spoiler warning? We say we're going to talk about Volume 3 of Poe Dameron.
So Empire, at the beginning of Empire, he uses the Force to pull the lightsaber to him to get him free, cut Somapa's arm off. He's saved, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Well, that moment of him using the Force to pull that lightsaber, that's the biggest use of the Force we've seen canonically of Luke in the films up until that point. And that's supposed to be this, this huge moment for him. So in the comics, we can't surpass that up until that point. And or take it to another point, like Han Solo's role. Han Solo is, I think, a general by the time Empire Strikes Back happens. I think that's his rank.
I thought he was still captain in Empire, but then he's like miraculously a general.
Is that what it is?
Back, yeah, he's captain in Empire and general when he.
Yeah, but it's like one of those
Jabba's.
like weird points, which is he like was frozen as a captain and was thawed a general.
Yes.
You know what? Shit happens.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, my headcanon is just a lot of people died.
He had a lot of time to think in there.
He was just contemplating strategy. He was basically just playing StarCraft.
Exactly. Okay, so captain, but still, at the end of A New Hope, this was a guy who like abandoned everyone and came back at the last minute. Sure. But, like, is that a guy that you want to be captain? if he's prone to abandoning people? No. Right. Like, so there's obviously a character arc that happened there. Vader obviously knows in Empire that it's Skywalker, whereas he didn't know that at the end of A New Hope. And so there's a story there. It's a lot of like plotting out like, okay, where are the gaps and what gaps can we fill? And what gaps has Lucasfilm not already accounted for in their other projects?
Yeah, and that makes sense. I mean, we've always felt, this is coloring in the lines of a broader story that's, a story that's told in broad strokes in the movies. So we've always appreciated that the comics kind of add nuance to a story that we already love so much, but add some of the detail that sometimes just kind of has to go missing in a movie. But now we have the opportunity to go in depth with comics. So
yeah, but my question then, sort of bouncing off of that, is when and where does Story Group actually come in and suggest things to you? Like, are they coming forward with ideas, or is it purely writer editors pitching like, here's what we'd like to do at this point in the Star Wars canon?
Both. It's sometimes it's Marvel being like, okay, this miniseries is ending. We obviously need to have another miniseries to replace it, so we still have our publishing calendar full. This is what we would like to do. Lucasfilm can come back to us and be like, oh, we don't like any of these for reasons X, Y, and Z. Or, let's do a Lando one. Great. Or Lucasfilm will come to us and be like, hey, we have this great idea. Ryan Johnson had this cool idea for a scene or a character or something, but he wasn't able to do it in TLJ. Would you guys like to tell a comic about this story? Which is how we got the DJ one shot, or it's how we got the C-3PO one shot for TFA. Was stuff that the directors really wanted to tell, but they weren't able to in the films, and so we got to tell that in the comics, which was really cool to do. And yeah, like Lucasfilm is involved the entire process, everything from pitches and outlines. Like the writer and editor will work on it a couple times to get it to a place where we feel okay. So I'll go through, and any potential red flags, like if I see in Kieran's pitching, he's like, well, you know what, I kind of want to kill Darth Vader in issue 25. That's when I go to him and be like, he's got to last like 5 more years canonically, so let's not. I know you want him to be a Force ghost inside the suit. I don't think it works that way. Sorry. So we work out those red flags first, and then we send it to Lucasfilm, and then Lucasfilm will go through, and that's when Story Group gets involved, and they'll go through and give their notes. And if it's a book like, say, Kanan, which kind of had to do with Rebels a little bit, that will then go to like the animation team. So like Dave Filoni will be involved, and they'll look at it and make sure that it's not crossing any of their lines either. And sometimes on the projects that are closer tied with the films, it goes all the way up to JJ, to Ryan, Kathy, etc.
Cool. Well, let's shift gears to another collaborative Star Wars storytelling medium. So, Heather, I heard you talking on an interview about playing the Star Wars Wizards of the Coast RPG in college.
Yeah.
And I'd be curious to hear your experiences. We, on Certain Point of View, are running the Star Wars Revised Edition rule set as a podcast called the Scruffy Nerf Herders, where I'm the Dungeon Master, Addy, Ben, our co-hosts, and then we've got some other people who come on, are all playing characters in it. It's set between A New Hope and Empire, which has been just like a lot of fun to do, sort of pick out moments that it's like, oh, this is canonically a thing.
Yeah, and we're like the F team of the rebellion.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. But I was curious if you wanted to talk a little bit about your experiences, like what you guys did, what edition you did, if you have thoughts about RPG games in general, because I feel like that's a thing that people don't ask you a lot about, but like D&D's big right now, and I'm just curious where you stand.
Yeah, I can't remember what it like when you're asking what edition, are you talking like what edition for Dungeons and Dragons, like in general?
Sort of. I mean, like the Star Wars ones.
Because I'm 3.5 through and through.
Okay, I am still running I'm sorry, I shouldn't say running. I'm playing in a 3.5 game that has been going for 5 years now.
All right, we'll see.
Yeah.
There you go. Don't get me started on 4th. It's trash.
It has redeeming qualities. He
the
says as a
redeeming
person.
qualities are 5th edition. Okay. Oh man, I haven't played in forever. It's hard to get a solid group as an adult.
You say that, but then I have five games.
We got a couple people who want in on our game.
That's
right
fair.
now.
Okay, I guess I'm too busy. I don't know, but I was in the best group ever as fellow role players. Like, when you find a solid group and you can have a group in a campaign last for 4, 5, 6 years. Like, there's just something so cool about that, and it's hard to replicate. And that was the Star Wars group that I had. I honestly can't remember what version of the game it was, because it's so long ago and I feel so old. But it was based off 3.5. I know that.
I'm guessing it was the revised rule set, which is actually the version that we're using.
I think
it had
so.
The rule book had like artwork from Attack of the Clones.
Yes.
Yeah.
That is correct.
If my video was on, I would pull it out to show you, but our connection's been so bad. I don't.
That's okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, our campaign took place. It started a year after Order 66. And basically we were there was a collection of surviving Jedi, of just kind of these lone scoundrels, couple droids like thrown in, and we were the beginning of the rebellion, and we played through, the death of the Emperor, basically. And it was super, super fun. I remember one of my friends, Robbie, constructed a map of the galaxy on corkboard, and we had little pins for all the different planets. Like, he built out like the inner rim, the core worlds, outer rim, etc., unexplored areas, and every single planet was a different colored pin based on if it was under Imperial rule, if it was a rebelling planet, if it had no loyalty either way. That way we could change the colors based on our story.
That's amazing.
Yeah. Oh no, we were like super, super into it, and as kind of like a thank you to my players, I made each and every single one of their characters canon in some way, shape, or form in the Star Wars comics. They all got little
so
shout
awesome.
outs.
Oh my god, that's
their
great.
shout outs were done in a way so that they were still canonical. So like the couple of players that were Jedi that survived Order 66 in the newer series of Darth Vader that Charles Soule is writing.
Oh, no way. On Mon
yeah.
Calamari?
Yeah, the list. No, but not the Mon Cal, but there's a list that the Emperor shows Vader. Here's all these Force-sensitive users out there that we know still exist.
Right.
Yeah, and and there's a list of these names, and I had to just come up with names in the office one day. So like, I put a couple of these players on there, and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it was my little shout out to my friends, just like, now you live in the Star Wars universe.
That's so awesome. So backing up and making something a little casual instead of sort of this interview. Like it feels like right now we're doing a little bit of a professional interview. Usually we're a little bit more laid back, but I always kind of like exploring and figuring out like how people kind of discovered Star Wars for themselves. Like, what was their into the Star Wars universe? What was it for you that initially kind of connected you to Star Wars as a fan?
So I watched the original trilogy as a kid. I remember my dad showing it to me when I was like, kindergarten, first, second grade, something like that. And I remember really enjoying it. But honestly, for me, it wasn't until Phantom Menace came out, because I was the right age. I was like 7 or 8 when Phantom Menace came out. That like I just became obsessed. And I think for me, just at that age, it was because like, oh, I was the same age as Jake Lloyd. That was relatable for me as a kid. And then, Padme was super young too. So for a young woman to see this badass young woman in this role was awesome. But
totally,
this is one of my Star Wars origin story is one of my favorite Star Wars stories I have. So I was lucky enough to go to an elementary school where they took us to see Phantom Menace as a field trip. And I was just in love with it. I was so enthralled with the film that when the rest of my class got up to leave the theater to go home, I hid in the theater so I could watch the movie over and over all day long.
That's so cool.
That's great.
And needless to say, I got in a little bit of trouble, but I like to say my career path paid off. I don't know. It was worth it in the end.
For sure.
That's very lucky. So I was a freshman in high school when it came out, and we took shifts standing in line for the opening night at the Uptown Theater in DC, which is like a big, not IMAX size, but like historic large screen theater. So we took shifts who skipped school that day to stay in line.
Oh my
and all of us got in a shitload of trouble when it finally was all done. But like the teachers were kind of like, we understand. Like it was an all boys school, so there was this sort of like, it could be worse. Like they could be doing a lot worse right now.
Oh my
Star
goodness.
Wars, okay.
That's crazy.
Yeah. Oh man, I'm the baby Star Wars fan here. I came in pretty late into everything because I was raised pretty conservatively and wasn't allowed to watch a whole lot. And a friend introduced it to me in high school, and this was in between Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones. So I got in full in, also during the prequel era, and we camped out actually at the same Uptown Theater for Revenge of the Sith. So definitely one of my favorite memories, like for like 24 hours out in front of that theater. So but yeah, so like what do you feel is sort of like like it feels like everyone has something different that kind of speaks to them about Star Wars, and like is there one sort of enduring quality or a couple that kind of really hold true for you still?
I think for me it's a lot of just you can choose your own destiny, and your actions impact that destiny. So like Luke could have stayed on Tatooine, he didn't have to go. He didn't have to train in Dagobah. He didn't have to keep going. It was hard. Han didn't have to come back. Leia didn't have to keep going after she watched her entire planet get blown up. And so I think it's these through lines of staying strong through adversity and just, witnessing these terrible, terrible horrors, and still coming out the other side, like stronger, better, and united with those you love, is something super, super impactful, where you have the adverse to that, which is succumbing to the darkness around you. And the consequences of that, which we see with Vader, we see with Kylo, and we see Kylo fight it. And that's one of the coolest things I think about the new trilogy is you see Kylo fight it, and you see even Rey deal with it.
Right.
In a way that we haven't really seen, I think, realistically. You get it a little bit with Luke and Vader.
But there's a whole lot more nuance for sure.
There's so much more
Jedi.
nuance, and I think a lot of it too is just the relationship, like the Force calls they did in 8, where you can see the manipulation, you can see the battle, and you see the the Rashamans, all about perspective and how you deal with that, and how each person interprets it because of their past experiences and what they take from that. And it's just, when you break it down psychologically, it can be super, super powerful that your actions in the face of adversity have so much input on what your destiny ultimately ends up becoming.
Absolutely. Yeah, where I'm on the same page with you there, because I'm a huge Last Jedi fan. I think it's I love Empire. For the longest time, it's been my favorite, but I really, really love The Last Jedi, and I think I've watched it far more times than I probably should admit, but it continually grows on me and it's become my favorite Star Wars movie as a consequence. Just kind of dealing with sort of the past and the legacy of the Star Wars universe and what that means, along with that very personal conflict. And the idea, like, I've always loved the idea of choice, and our heroes are ones who have to live with their choices. I kind of felt that often the villains in this story are ones that almost give up their choice to the sense of destiny rather than owning their decisions in a way, which I think is just so appropriate for even some of the things that as a society we're kind of currently dealing with as well, with the the way we're having to figure out our identity as a culture and as a society. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to necessarily go off on a Last Jedi rant.
No, I think it's really apt. I think like Star Wars really appeals to people because it offers different types of heroism in a way that like not a lot of media can really do convincingly. Mm-hmm. Like the idea of like either like you're like lone agent, like a Han Solo type, can interact with Luke Skywalker, who both starts off as just a normal guy who's like rising to the challenge, but eventually becomes like this truly almost divine figure, and like is interacting in this like vast like scale that is borderline religious, but is like certainly encompassing of the galaxy as a whole. But in its own sense, like when you achieve such greatness, it almost becomes like the Sisyphusian element of like resisting the temptation just to be controlled by the Force, but to actually like to strike forward and be a virtuous soul. Like it's an impressive layering of of different types of hero narratives, like which I think the series doesn't get a lot of credit for. I mean, it does, but it doesn't.
I agree. I think there are definitely people that really delve into it, but I think on a surface, it gets stuck on that surface level of like, the Force wizardry and all, and people just can't get past that a lot of times.
Yes, as we've discovered with this past movie.
And I think like that's why for me, like why I think Rogue One like really stood out, because I think Rogue One of all the films, because it's so stripped of the Jedi. Because let's face it, when everyone thinks Star Wars, like most people just automatically think lightsabers, right? And Jedi and the Force. But I feel like Rogue One really got to the heart of the message, of just people of different backgrounds coming together to fight for, just for good.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is, I think of our group, we had 4 people do our review for Rogue One, and I think from the beginning I've been the biggest fan of Rogue One.
Yeah, well, we did it twice. So we did a review on the main show, and then for another pass, where the format for that show is we talk about what changes could have been made at the time of production to make it better. And both of us came off sort of on the more optimistic side about it. Like I was arguing just like some minor music changes, really, and like a few editing tweaks. And yours were just generally pretty positive thoughts.
Because I've always been fascinated about the idea of people without the Force in this galaxy.
That's always what I played as in my Star Wars D&D campaigns.
Perfect. Like, well, which is, I mean, I love, getting Dr. Aphra in addition to this world. It's such a, I mean, Han has always been a fun character to play with, but get what. Well, I think there's always also this sort of misinterpretation, and I don't know where this came from, how you guys felt about this from the story perspective, but that Jedi aren't necessarily all powerful and all knowing, or Sith for that matter either. That it isn't quite that Superman power set, and that there's so much that's about focus and personal discipline, or lack of it as well. So that so much so the you can being the volatility of a person's emotions have so much play with that, so that they aren't invulnerable. Because it almost feels like sometimes, when we get in those nerd battles of like, well, how would Luke versus Spider-Man go? Like when we get into those kind of nerd debates, like sometimes we forget that this Star Wars story is very much about people and dealing with different emotions or choices and all of that. So I always find that fascinating. And I guess that's why I always come down on, like, I find the non-Force users often the most fascinating players in the universe. So
yeah. Well, like for our game, for example, we had the rule of like no Jedi.
That didn't go well at first.
Well, it made it work somewhat.
Yeah, so I ended up playing a Force user because I just had the only stat I had that was worthwhile was wisdom. And
yeah, we did the classic like 3d6 down the line rolls. So he had like 8s and everything except like a 14 in wisdom, and it's just like I guess if you want to survive, we're gonna have to give you some superpowers.
So yeah, but things happen. So
yeah, a lot of things happen.
Yeah. So again, shifting gears a bit. So obviously, eSports is a world you're kind of playing in right now as well. You've kind of shifted from comics to eSports a little bit more, and I know you still have your hand in comics. And of course, you're working with Unicorn, and there's a lot of eSports news and then betting as well. What are sort of the challenges right now as an eSports journalist? I know obviously eSports is a little bit bigger outside of the US, but like what are the big things you guys are having to deal with right now?
I mean, it's the big thing that the esports industry in general is just continuing to struggle is being seen as a legitimate sport in and of itself. To much more traditional fans, or I guess you say the older generation, they just see it as a bunch of kids playing video games, and like, yeah, it is, right? But like, wasn't basketball just people just throwing a ball around at first?
Thank you.
Like that's what it is. This is a specific set of skills, just like playing golf, just like playing chess, just like doing your taxes. We hire professionals to do our taxes. These are professionals that play video games competitively, and they do it well, and they work hard, and it's like that is continuously just the biggest battle right now is being seen as a legitimate sport, because aside from just legitimacy from a casual fans perspective that watches this, but one of the biggest battles that esports has right now is legitimacy with the governments of the various countries, because all of these different countries are still deciding whether or not internally they count esports, League of Legends, CSGO, whatever, Dota, as an actual athletic competition of very shape and form. A lot of these international players can't get visas in order to travel and play tournaments with their teams, which causes a lot of issues if you can't show up on game day. So there's those are the biggest struggles I think right now in the industry, is just the fight for legitimacy. It's like comics fighting for years to be seen as a legitimate art form, and years to be seen as a legitimate form of literature, which it's still battling. It's still something that the comics industry is fighting, and just like Hollywood is still fighting, culturally relevant comic book films like Black Panther and Wonder Woman. They don't want to nominate these for your high prestigious best film awards because, well, they're superheroes. So, what cultural relevance do those stories actually have?
Right.
So yeah, I think it's just in general like the geek culture conversation of being seen as legitimate forms of art.
Do you find that there's also that's definitely bridging the gap to the world at large. What do you find that there's certain challenges maybe bridging esports to the geek community itself, like maybe translating following a game and following individual players and teams, because fantasy football helps sort of the average the average Joe who's not necessarily as into football suddenly get into it because they have some investment in it. Do you think there's still some of that struggle with esports?
Oh, I 100% think so. I think because it is still such a new industry, it's hard to really be able to build that fan base. I think specifically too because rosters are constantly changing.
Right.
You don't have a steady roster for any game, for any team for an entire season. You just don't.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen, and so it's either you choose a player and you follow that player, or you choose a team and follow that team. There really is you can't choose a player and a team because chances are that player is not going to be on that team in 6 months.
Right.
And so that makes it really, really hard to build a solid fan base. I think there's also the struggle of locality, which Overwatch League understands and is really working towards as they build these home teams. And by 2020, instead of everyone playing at Blizzard Arena every weekend for the Overwatch League, they're actually going to have Boston Uprising in Boston, San Francisco Shock in San Francisco, et cetera,
Nice.
et cetera. And so because of that, they'll be able to do localization. The team can meet the fans, and the fans can actually go to see the matches. And I think also having the accessibility, from the media, having the access and accessibility to watch these games on channels like ABC, NBC, ESPN, will also make it easier to build a fan base too. And that will help bridge the gap, because right now the only people really watching esports are people who play esports,
Right.
because they're the only ones that know how to access it.
Right.
So yeah, there's those issues too.
Yeah, I'm a Ben and I especially, and Case definitely. I think we're all Blizzard game fans, among other games as well. But for a while, we've been trying to pay attention as much as we can to Heroes of the Storm, and I think there's a lot of great coverage for it. But it's still one of those things where sometimes I'm not quite able to translate what a commentator is trying to explain to and this is as a player, I'm not necessarily able to understand what they're executing. I just kind of see, oh, this is a great kill right here, or this is a really fun moment. Right now it seems like it's built for, right now highlights seems to be standing out for me as someone who really, I love throwing on Twitch and watching esports of any sort, but obviously for a game I play, I'm a little bit more invested in it.
Yeah,
no,
I think
100%. I mean, I'm the same way. I got into esports because of one specific game, and that game is still burgeoning in esports as it is. So it's still so young, and I think that's the big thing that people are getting frustrated by and are continuously overlooking. Is yes, it's become a very lucrative industry very quickly, but it isn't quite where. It isn't the NFL yet, and that's also because, people have really only been paying attention to esports on a casual side for 3-4 years. Like,
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's kind of similar to the slow growth and then the explosion for poker that happened around like 2005, 2006. I guess a little bit earlier when it like really hit, but where like poker was a sport you could watch. Or I should say a game you could watch, but like the games that people were playing, there was like a lot of different rule sets. But then like sort of the advent of whole card cameras came in at about the same time that Texas Hold'em like hit just in the right way, where it's like, okay, here's like a codified rule set that we really understand, and also here's a thing that allows us to like get into sort of like what the players are actually thinking at that time, that allowed for people who didn't know the rules that well to sort of see, here's the simple, this is what the hand looks like, but then people who did know the rules to have a better concept of like what the metagame was going on, like what does the table look like, and I think maybe it's just a matter of like, well, is that bridge there yet for esports? Like, you can tune into a game of like Super Smash Brothers and you might understand that like, okay, well, Fox is fast and Donkey Kong is slow, but do you understand like that, oh well, that Yoshi player is specifically choosing Yoshi because people are bad fighting Yoshi? Like those sort of elements, people like a casual person isn't going to get. So it's curious with every game that comes out, like, are we getting closer to that point? Like the introduction of MOBAs and other games, like those are starting to get there. Like you can kind of just tune in and watch that a bit more. But like, is there going to be another breakthrough that like takes games a little bit further into being a spectator sport? Right.
Yeah, I think we're getting there. The conversation with bringing esports to the Olympics keeps growing and growing. And this year, leading into Korea, they had esports competitions, around the Olympic arena, and broadcasted in the weeks before, and they got really good turnout. So it's the pairing of the esports with, traditional sports and showing the similarities between the two that's really helping. Also, I mean, traditional sports are trying to gain the interest in younger fans, and they understand that the younger fans like video games, and so there are all these partnerships that are happening between traditional sports and esports. Like a number of first pitches for the MLB this year were thrown by Overwatch League players, because it got parents would bring their kids then to the baseball games, because their kids knew the Overwatch players and wanted to meet the Overwatch players, but the parents wanted to see baseball. So it's trying to burgeon growth between the two different industries, which I think is interesting too.
Yeah, it's a fascinating kind of moment to be in in this industry as well. So,
so I had one more big question, although it's segueing back to Star Wars, if you're okay with that.
I hate Star Wars.
So Addy was kind of riffing on this one. I'm a big fan of like the old EU, and I know you've mentioned that you're a fan of the old EU, and I'm curious, what thing do you miss the most that really couldn't come back? Like what element that like the new world just is not going to allow for in any way?
The infinities. The Star Wars infinities.
Okay, yeah.
Because everything has to be canon now, so you can't have any fun.
I was wondering how much...
So there's no way to do an Elseworlds tale with...
No. Oh, trust
really?
me. Trust me.
They really wouldn't allow that, because you were talking about the white Darth Vader, and I was thinking about that story.
I know. It's so good. That was something that, I mean, who knows? I don't want to say, no, because who knows what happens.
The possibility.
Yeah. You never know. But like that was something that Jordan and I like were fighting for on day one. Was we really wanted to do the infinities. We wanted to do our own holiday special. Like we wanted to do,
you couldn't even do like a Marvel What If, change the labeling to...
Wait, so I need to hold this conversation for a moment. Is Lumpy no longer canon then?
It depends on who you ask in Story Group.
Yeah.
It depends on who you ask. I think Matt would say yes, but...
Okay, yeah, I can see that. Yeah, that's going to mess with me for the rest of the night.
The canonicity of all these characters.
Yeah. Good. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's I mean, that's a great answer since, yeah, like that was a fun like feeding ground for story ideas, like seeing what characters people were actually interested in that you may not be able to play around with. Like Darth Maul, I know a lot of people got really excited when they brought like a clone of Darth Maul story in there, and he fought Vader, and Vader like actually stabbed himself to kill Maul, like that.
I also just like, for me, like when universes and stories like don't take themselves so seriously. Like, you know, at the end of the day, this is all fantasy, so have fun with it. They are space wizards. Weird shit is gonna happen. Like,
which I always thought was one of the appeals of the Star Wars universe. And I think there, in some senses, they still know not to take themselves too seriously. But hopefully they open up on that Elseworlds front eventually.
Yeah, who knows? I mean, it's all just still so new, you know, with the new canon and the new films and all that. So who knows? But I have my Infinities pitches tucked away, so we'll see what happens.
Ben actually had a question for you. So who would you cast as Gwenpool in an MCU movie?
Gwenpool would play Gwenpool.
That I don't think there's any more appropriate response to that.
Like, she's real. She's from our universe. I don't understand.
Right.
Well, but she's trapped in the comics.
Is she though?
Right now. That's true.
I don't know. She takes over my Twitter from time to time, so
that's true.
She's more powerful than we know.
So I had another sort of lighthearted question, which is, are we going to get any more cute photo ops with you and Beaker the Penguin?
Oh, I wish. Oh, that's the best question ever. But oh God, I wish. That was the best day of my life. I told my boyfriend surprised me, and I told him, I was just like, you peaked. You're never gonna be able to top this.
And he's like, a challenge accepted. Okay.
Right.
I guess, like, buy me a penguin. I don't know. Like, that's the next. I have to say, tangenting for a second, I think that's my favorite thing about my followers on social media, is I've understood and realized how much I've personally tweeted about penguins, because penguins aren't in my bio at all. Like, they're not. I don't feel like I talk about them that much, but if I ever say like, oh, I've had a bad day, people just automatically send me penguin images. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I just like that my followers know me and they know my love of penguins, and the comics community has embraced my love of penguins. One of my recent clients, actually, on a phone call when we were working out the terms of the agreement, he was like, is there a penguin clause in your contract? I was like, no, but now I want to add one. Right.
As you grow in popularity and become a bigger star, eventually it'll be just that'll be your green M&Ms scenario.
It really will, though. Like, I think I've gotten a little too overzealous with my powers. I don't know if that's the way to say that, but like, comics that I have nothing to do with, like, artists will draw penguins in and then, like, you know, text me a picture of the panel where they like snuck a little penguin in and be like, look what I did.
That's awesome. Oh my God. Like, that's got to feel good though, that you have like, because that's a friend relationship there. Like, people who like just feel that you touch them in such a way that they want to like throw those references to you.
Oh, for sure. It's super, super humbling and flattering, and I love it so much. Like, I'm so thankful for it. Like, I think one of my proudest moments of my contributions to Marvel, aside from just Gwenpool herself, was her backpack, her penguin backpack. And it was just Guri Hero one day was writing in like, we want to give her a backpack so she can hold all her stuff that she has while she's running around. And I was just like, I have a penguin backpack. Can you draw her in this penguin backpack just because I want her to have a penguin? And they did. And then the action figure came out, and the action figure actually gave her the penguin backpack.
Oh my God.
And I was like, this is my contribution. Like, I did have Star Wars fans ask if I was the one who created porgs, which was really funny to me.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I didn't, but it's nice to think that someone out there thinks I have that power.
Right.
The Gwenpool of the real world.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, I feel like that's it for questions I had. Addy, do you have anything?
Yeah, just sort of one thing to wrap up, because obviously, there's plenty of, well, to put it lightly, there's definitely some vicious arguments and some very difficult people to deal with right now in the nerd world as we're kind of growing and as in some ways we're accepting more people into our community. And, obviously, you're someone who's sort of at the forefront of that. So, obviously, you get a whole lot more messages and posts that are from people in that world. So, I know we could spend hours and honestly we could spend days talking about Comicsgate and some of the importance or the ramifications of diversity in comics and in all of our stories, but I kind of wanted to translate it to something a little bit different. So, like, what do you do sort of personally to kind of deal with a lot of the negativity that's out there in social media and in your workplace?
I mean, two things. There's one is just, it's Twitter. You can turn it off. It's Facebook. You can turn it off. You can walk away from it. You don't have to be engaged with it if you don't want to. And then also, like, for me, it's just remembering why I'm doing what I'm doing. I'm working in comics and games because I love them. I love them so much, and I love interacting with the fans. And there's something so indescribable and rewarding about, working on franchises like Star Wars or creating Gwenpool and then working on Deadpool and all of these stories and knowing that, a 35-year-old man in Texas is picking up this issue the same time a 13-year-old girl in France is picking up this issue. And they both love Dr. Aphra with the same amount of vigor and passion and get online and they find a connection and bond over this love of the same character. Like, I met some of my best friends on Twitter because of Batman. And just we love Batman. The Star Wars community has some of my fiercest friends, that I've made because of this. And like that's why I do this. I do this to make these connections and to help people see themselves in these stories and see themselves in these characters. Like we talked about with Star Wars, coming from these backgrounds and being in charge and having autonomy over their own destinies. Despite outside forces. And, despite these outside forces, that is negativity online, I'm going to continue to fight through and do what I think is right and hopefully shine some light in a world that could be a little brighter.
Well, thank you so much for spending time with us today, Heather.
Of course. Thank you for having me. Anytime, guys.
You can find Heather on Twitter at Heather Antos. In fact, we've also got a link to her Twitter and social media from our website and from our episode description. You can find all of that information on our website, certainpov.com. And if you'd like to be a part of what we do on this podcast, if you'd like to support it in a variety of ways, you can do that through Patreon. That's one of the best ways to do it.
Yeah,
Chase,
Patreon has been great as a way of sort of connecting with people and bringing money in to help us continue what we do. It's, like podcasting isn't free. It takes time, but it also there's hosting fees. There's all kinds of stuff. So it's been great having some support from our fans and from our friends.
And one thing I'm especially grateful for is pretty much all of our very basic operating costs are covered by our patrons. But I think there's also sort of like, hey, we have a dream list of like what we'd like to do, like more entertainment and more options we'd like to offer. So if you are the kind of person who'd like to see more from us in the future, please consider supporting us through Patreon. It's only by doing by more patron support that we can increase some more, give you more podcasts, give you YouTube channels. We've definitely got lots of different ideas of stuff that we'd like to do, and we got plenty of people that we can do that with. But it all kind of starts with being able to do that and maybe changing what we like. This is the kind of thing we'd love to be professional nerds. Like we talked with Heather today, and this is one of those ways that we can give it credibility and give you more content as well. You can find all of that on our website if you click under support, actually, and just go to our website, certainpov.com. Well, that wraps it up for today, so until next time, stay scruffy, my nerf herder.